A movie that was supposed to be a quick 6-week jungle shoot turned into one of the most catastrophic and magnificent productions in Hollywood history. A leading man had a near-fatal heart attack in the middle of the Philippine jungle. A legendary actor showed up 300 pounds overweight, having never read the script. And the director who made it all happen literally mortgaged his house, his winery, and his Oscars to keep the cameras rolling. This is Apocalypse Now, and these are 15 weird facts you definitely didn't know. Fact 15. George Lucas was supposed to direct this picture. It's 1969. A young screenwriter named John Milius hands a script called The Psychedelic Soldier to two of his film school buddies, Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas. The plan was simple. Lucas would direct, Coppola would produce. They'd shoot it guerrilla style, on 16mm black and white film, in a pseudo-documentary aesthetic, in actual Vietnam, while the war was still happening. Here's the kicker. Warner Brothers bought the script, the deal was in place, and then financing fell apart. Coppola pivoted to direct The Godfather to keep his production company afloat, and Lucas eventually drifted toward a little film about space. By the time Coppola was ready to resurrect Apocalypse Now in 1975, Lucas had moved on, busy with Star Wars. The irony? Two of the defining films of the 1970s were born from the same abandoned project. And when Star Wars became a smash hit while Coppola was drowning in the Philippine jungle, he reportedly sent Lucas a telegram asking him for money. Fact 14. 5 A-list stars said no to Captain Willard. Coppola didn't walk right up to Martin Sheen. Not even close. The role of Captain Willard, the moral and narrative spine of the entire film, was turned down by Robert Redford, Jack Nicholson, Steve McQueen, and Al Pacino before Coppola even got to Harvey Keitel. McQueen's reasoning? He flat out refused to spend 17 weeks shooting in the Philippine jungle. He reportedly asked for $3 million anyway, a staggering fee for the era, and then proposed an alternate arrangement. Clint Eastwood should play Willard, and he'd play Kurtz, a role requiring only 3 weeks on location. Coppola passed, so Keitel got the job. He lasted less than 2 weeks before Coppola decided his performance was too intense and active for what the role demanded. Willard needed to be a passive observer, not a driver of scenes. Keitel was out. Sheen, who had previously auditioned for The Godfather and originally declined Apocalypse Now due to another commitment, finally said yes. Remarkably, only 4 days of reshoots were needed after the full recast. A minor miracle considering the scale of what had already been filmed. Sometimes the best cast is the one you land on after everyone else says no. Fact 13. The budget tripled. Coppola bet everything. When Coppola arrived in the Philippines in March 1976, the approved budget was $12 million, and the plan was a 5-month shoot targeting an April 1977 release. Neither of those things happened. Not even close. By the time principal photography wrapped, 238 shooting days later, in May 1977, the budget had ballooned past $25 million, with Coppola's loan from United Artists to cover overruns exceeding $10 million on its own. Here's where it gets genuinely alarming. Coppola put up approximately $7 million of his own money to keep the production alive. Then he mortgaged his Napa Valley winery. Then his house. Then, when the bills kept coming, he signed over his profits from The Godfather as collateral. United Artists, apparently not confident their director would survive the shoot, took out a $15 million life insurance policy on him. The film ultimately cost around $31 million and grossed $150 million worldwide. Coppola's gamble paid off. Barely. But for a stretch of several years, one of Hollywood's most celebrated directors was one bad box office weekend away from personal bankruptcy. Fact 12. A typhoon destroyed the sets. 2 months into filming, Typhoon Olga made landfall in the Philippines and destroyed between 40% and 80% of the production's built sets. Production designer Dean Tavoularis later described watching the storm arrive. The rain got harder and harder until it was literally white outside, and every tree around them was bent at 45 degrees. The shoot shut down entirely for roughly 3 months. But the typhoon wasn't even the strangest logistical nightmare, because the US military wanted nothing to do with a film depicting an American officer being assassinated by his own government. Coppola was forced to borrow military hardware from the Philippine Armed Forces instead. The problem was that the Philippine military was simultaneously fighting an active communist insurgency in the jungle. and would periodically recall their helicopters mid-production to go fight real battles. One day you're filming the Ride of the Valkyries attack sequence. The next day, your helicopters are gone. Talk about life imitating art. A film about a war becoming ungovernable was being made by a crew that couldn't control its own equipment. Fact 11. Martin Sheen's hotel room breakdown was real. The film's opening scene, Captain Willard alone in a Saigon hotel room, shirtless, spiraling into a drunken breakdown, is one of the most viscerally raw moments in American cinema. That's because almost none of it was scripted. Martin Sheen was heavily intoxicated during the shoot, and at one point he punched the mirror on the wall for real, cutting his thumb so badly it bled through the entire take. That is genuinely his blood on the screen. The improvisation didn't stop there. Sheen, fully in the grip of his own personal demons at the time, reportedly tried to go after Coppola at one point during the scene. The director kept the cameras rolling. "He grabbed me," Coppola later recounted, describing how he tried to keep Sheen engaged without escalating the situation. The whole sequence has an energy unlike anything else in the film, precisely because it wasn't performed, so much as lived. The irony is that Sheen's real-life disintegration mirrors Willard's fictional one almost perfectly. It's the kind of accidental cinema that you can't plan and can't repeat. Fact 10. Sheen had a heart attack. In March 1977, roughly a year into shooting, Martin Sheen, who appears in virtually every scene of the film, suffered a heart attack. He was a quarter of a mile from the nearest assistance, in a jungle in the Philippines. He crawled to a road and was picked up by a passing vehicle. A priest administered last rites in a language Sheen didn't speak. Here's the twist. Sheen kept the heart attack secret from United Artists and the film's insurers. He described it publicly as a heat stroke to prevent the production from being shut down and the backers from pulling their money. While he recovered, his brother Joe Estevez stepped in, not just as a body double for wide shots, but also to record large portions of Captain Willard's voiceover narration, entirely uncredited. The substitution was so seamless that Coppola later admitted he genuinely couldn't identify which scenes featured Sheen and which featured Estevez. Joe Estevez is in a major studio film seen by tens of millions of people, and nobody knows his name. That's one of the more quietly extraordinary stories in Hollywood history. Fact 9. Brando arrived, 300 pounds overweight, and hadn't read the script. Marlon Brando had been contracted to play Colonel Kurtz for $3 million, $1 million of which was paid up front, for 3 weeks of work. When he finally showed up on set in September 1976, the entire costume department's work was immediately useless. Brando had arrived significantly overweight, reportedly over 300 pounds, and had not read the screenplay or Joseph Conrad's source novella Heart of Darkness, upon which the entire film was based. Coppola spent days reading Heart of Darkness aloud to Brando on set, while the 900-person cast and crew sat idle. He refused to be on set at the same time as Dennis Hopper, whom he found insufferable. He refused to perform the scripted scenes, demanded the dialogue be rewritten to accommodate his improvisation, and didn't want to be filmed below the waist. Cinematographer Vittorio Storaro and Coppola responded by shooting Brando almost entirely in shadow, a creative solution born entirely of necessity that ended up making Kurtz one of the most mythologically imposing figures in cinema. As Brando himself reportedly told Coppola at a certain point, "Francis, I've gone as far as I can go. If you need more, get another actor." The 18 minutes of improvised footage they ultimately kept were cut down to 2. The horror. The horror. Fact 8. Lawrence Fishburne was 14 years old. He lied about his age. The actor credited as Larry Fishburne in Apocalypse Now was not the legal filming age when production began. Fishburne was 14 years old when he arrived in the Philippines in March 1976 to play Tyrone Mr. Clean Miller, a 17-year-old soldier. He had lied about his age to get cast in the role, and the production either didn't verify or didn't mind. The shoot lasted so long, more than 3 years from first day of filming to theatrical release, that Fishburne genuinely aged through the film's production. He was 14 when he started. He was 17 by the time principal photography ended. He was 18 when Apocalypse Now finally opened in theaters in August 1979, technically playing a character younger than he'd actually been by the end of shooting. Dennis Hopper, according to multiple accounts, introduced Fishburne to heroin during the production. A teenager who lied to get into a war movie wound up in something far darker than he bargained for. And that performance launched one of the great careers in American film. Fact 7. Harrison Ford was technically in this before Star Wars came out. Here's a timeline that will make your head spin. Coppola hired a young, relatively unknown actor named Harrison Ford to play a military officer named Colonel Lucas. Yes, named after George Lucas, who delivers the film's central mission briefing. Ford had small parts in American Graffiti and The Conversation, but he was, by any measure, still a nobody when Apocalypse Now began filming in early 1976. Ford was reportedly so visibly nervous while shooting his scenes that Coppola rewrote the blocking to incorporate his anxiety. The character famously drops his dossier on the desk, a moment added specifically to absorb Ford's jitters. Then, in 1977, Star Wars was released. Ford became one of the biggest movie stars on the planet, and Apocalypse Now, shot before Star Wars, sat in post-production for 2 more years, finally arriving in theaters in August 1979, by which point Han Solo was a global icon. Ford appears in the film for about 2 minutes. He never even made the poster. Sometimes the footnote becomes the headline. Fact 6. The opening shot came out of the trash. Coppola shot an unprecedented 1.5 million feet of film during production. That volume of footage created a post-production process so immense it took nearly 3 years and 4 separate editors. The film finally premiered at Cannes in May 1979, still technically unfinished. During one late-night session in the editing bay, Coppola noticed reels piled near the garbage. He asked editor Richard Marx what they were. Marx told him it was static footage from an unused camera angle, one of 6 cameras that had filmed the napalm explosion sequence. Coppola looked at the footage and immediately recognized something in it. That discarded reel, a helicopter silhouetted against an orange sky, palm trees dissolving into flames, the end by the doors, building underneath, became the film's iconic opening shot. One of the most famous opening sequences in cinema history was, quite literally, rescued from the trash. Fact 5. Coppola cameos as a film director. This one is almost too on the nose to be true. During the beach assault scene, the famous Ride of the Valkyries sequence, there is a camera crew filming the battle as if it were a newsreel. The director shouting instructions to the soldiers not to look at the camera? That is Francis Ford Coppola himself. With him are real-life production designer Dean Tavoularis and cinematographer Vittorio Storaro. So in the finished film, you have the actual director of Apocalypse Now playing a fictional director filming a fictional war, while the actual cinematographer of Apocalypse Now is standing next to him, also playing himself, while the real cameras film all of them. It is a mise en abîme that either means nothing at all or means absolutely everything, depending on how deep into it you want to go. Coppola also needed the copyright and title of the film to appear somewhere in the movie per union regulations, since Apocalypse Now has no opening title card. His solution, graffiti painted on Kurtz's compound reading, "Our motto, Apocalypse Now. You have to look for it, but it's there." Fact 4. The narration was written by a Vietnam War correspondent. The voiceover that anchors the entire film, Willard's internal monologue threading the journey together, was not part of the original script. In 1978, more than a year after principal photography had ended, Coppola realized he needed a fully developed narration track to give Willard psychological depth across the film's sprawling runtime. He turned to Michael Hare, a journalist who had covered the Vietnam War firsthand and written the book Dispatches, which Coppola considered one of the most honest accounts of the conflict ever published. Hare wrote what amounted to hundreds of pages of possible voiceover, full selections that Coppola could pick and choose from. The fragments that made the cut, spare, poetic, fatalistic, give Apocalypse Now much of its literary weight, so the voice you hear throughout the film, written by a war correspondent, performed in part by the star's uncredited brother, and layered onto footage shot years earlier by a director who had nearly gone bankrupt making it. Every sentence of that narration is collaborative, in ways the credits don't begin to reflect. Fact 3. The water buffalo was actually killed. The film's climactic ritual, intercut with Willard's assassination of Kurtz, features the real slaughter of a water buffalo by members of the Ifugao tribe in the Philippines, carried out with a machete. This was not a special effect. Eleanor Coppola had witnessed the tribe perform this same ritual previously and filmed it. Coppola incorporated that footage into the film. The American Humane Association rated the film unacceptable for its animal content. But here's where it gets genuinely disturbing. At a certain point during production, human corpses appeared on set. Purchased, it turned out, from a man who was later identified as a grave robber. Police detained the film crew, held their passports, and confiscated the bodies. The production was formally questioned. They subsequently used extras posed as corpses instead. The American Humane Association rated the film unacceptable for the buffalo. Nobody seems to have had an official designation for the other thing. Fact 2. Coppola premiered an unfinished film at Cannes in May 1979. Coppola was invited to screen Apocalypse Now at the Cannes Film Festival. United Artists didn't want him to do it. The film was not finished. Coppola agreed anyway, citing the fact that his 1974 film The Conversation had won the Palme d'Or at Cannes as a kind of diplomatic trump card. The version screened at Cannes ran 139 minutes and was billed in the program as a work in progress, the first time in the festival's history that an unfinished film had ever competed. The audience gave it prolonged applause. At the subsequent press conference, a visibly frayed Coppola told the assembled press, "We were in the jungle, there were too many of us. We had access to too much money, too much equipment, and little by little we went insane." He also said, "With zero metaphor intended, my film is not about Vietnam, it is Vietnam." Apocalypse Now won the Palme d'Or and shared it with Volker Schlendorf's The Tin Drum. The announcement was reportedly greeted with boos and jeers from part of the audience. Coppola didn't have a finished film. He had the top prize at Cannes. Somehow that felt exactly right. Fact 1. Star Wars is Apocalypse Now, according to Walter Murch. Here's the wildest piece of the entire puzzle, and it comes from the film's own editor. George Lucas, as you now know, was the original director of Apocalypse Now. He stepped away, made Star Wars, and changed cinema forever. Years later, editor Walter Murch, who cut Apocalypse Now and had worked closely with both Coppola and Lucas, offered an interpretation that reframes everything. Murch said, "Star Wars was George's version of Apocalypse Now, rewritten in an otherworldly context. The rebels in Star Wars are the Vietnamese, and the Empire is the United States." Lucas himself, per Murch, was haunted by Apocalypse Now long after walking away. He couldn't shake it, so he made it anyway, just with spaceships. Whether you buy that reading or not, the numbers are undeniable. Star Wars opened in May 1977. Apocalypse Now opened in August 1979. Both were, in different ways, about the American involvement in Vietnam. One made $1 billion and spawned a franchise that still runs today. The other nearly destroyed its director financially, and is considered among the greatest films ever made. George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola started from the same jungle. They just went in very different directions. Bonus fact, Robert Duvall's entire role is only 11 minutes long. Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore is one of the most iconic supporting characters in cinema. His dialogue, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning, Charlie don't surf," the whole magnificent surfer warrior persona, is quoted at bars and parties and film schools to this day. Empire magazine named the helicopter attack sequence the most memorable film scene ever made. In a 2004 UK poll, Kilgore's napalm monologue was voted the best movie speech of all time. Robert Duvall's total screen time in Apocalypse Now? 11 minutes. That is all the footage it took to earn him an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actor and a Golden Globe win. Duvall has said publicly that he was furious about the cut of a scene in which Kilgore saves the life of a Vietnamese baby during the beach assault. A moment he felt gave the character moral complexity. Coppola removed it. The scene that might have made Kilgore human is gone. What remains is 11 minutes of pure, undiluted mythology. Sometimes what you cut is what makes it immortal. Apocalypse Now wasn't trying to change the world. It was trying to survive being made. And yet, look at what it left behind. It launched Lawrence Fishburne toward a career that would take him from this teenage jungle to The Matrix. It gave us "I love the smell of napalm in the morning," a line so embedded in the culture that even people who've never seen the film know it. It proved that a movie could be simultaneously an epic war film, a Conrad adaptation, a psychological horror story, and a director's very public nervous breakdown. It created a documentary about its own making, Hearts of Darkness, that is almost as good as the film itself. And it did all of it while mortgaging someone's house, cheating death twice, and being screened at Cannes unfinished. Was it high art? Arguably yes. Was it a controlled production? Absolutely not. Was it worth it? $150 million worldwide. a Palme d'Or, and 45 years of being called one of the greatest films ever made, says the answer is yes. What was the fact that surprised you most? Drop it in the comments. And if you learned something, consider subscribing and hitting that notification bell. More of these are coming, and some of the productions make this one look organized. Stay curious, and we'll see you on the next one.